Elena Marsh had circled the date on her calendar for weeks. 5 years. 5 years since Daniel Hart had gone down on one knee in the same restaurant they were about to return to. 5 years since she had said yes, without a second of hesitation. She wanted this anniversary to feel like a beginning again, not just another checkbox on a long list of years that had quietly grown heavier. She spent 3 weeks planning it. She called the restaurant herself to make sure they could get the corner table by the window, the one with the small brass plaque that read, "Reserved for special occasions." She bought a new dress, deep green, the color Daniel had once told her made her look like she belonged in a painting. She had her hair done that afternoon, her nails done the day before, and she stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, turning side to side, trying to see herself the way she hoped he would see her that night. She arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. She did not mind waiting. She ordered a glass of wine and watched the door, feeling that familiar flutter of anticipation that 5 years of marriage had not fully worn away, no matter how much daily life had tried. Daniel arrived 40 minutes late. He did not apologize when he sat down. He smelled faintly of a perfume that was not Elena's, something floral and unfamiliar, and he barely glanced at her before pulling his phone from his pocket and setting it on the table beside his plate. Throughout the appetizer, he checked it twice. During the main course, 3 more times. Elena tried to keep the conversation alive, asking about his day, about the new client his firm had landed, about anything that might pull his attention back to her. He answered in short sentences, distracted, his eyes drifting to the screen every few minutes like it held something more interesting than the woman sitting across from him. When the waiter came by to clear their plates, he smiled warmly and asked if they were celebrating something special tonight. Daniel let out a short laugh before Elena could answer. 5 years, he said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. 5 years of me settling. The words landed like a slap, quiet and sharp all at once. Elena's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fall away, leaving only the ringing in her ears and the heat rising in her cheeks. A couple at the next table exchanged a glance. The waiter's smile faltered, unsure how to respond, and he mumbled something about bringing dessert on the house before retreating toward the kitchen. Elena did not cry. She would not give him that. She set her glass down carefully, straightened her shoulders, and looked at Daniel with a calm that surprised even her. Settling, she repeated softly, almost to herself. Daniel shrugged, already reaching for his phone again, as if he had not just said something that would stay with her long after the meal ended. "You know what I mean," he muttered, not bothering to look up. "It's just a joke." It was not a joke. Elena knew that the way you know the weather is about to turn, a change in the air before the storm actually arrives. She smiled at the waiter when he returned with a small plate of chocolate cake and 2 spoons, thanked him kindly, and finished her half of the dessert as though the evening had gone exactly as planned. She talked about small, safe things for the rest of the meal. She let Daniel pay the bill. She walked beside him to the car without a word out of place. But somewhere between the restaurant door and the passenger seat, something inside her had quietly shifted. A door had closed, and she had not even needed to slam it. It simply closed on its own, the way doors do when they have been left open too long and finally give in to the wind. That night, lying awake beside a husband who fell asleep within minutes, Elena stared at the ceiling and thought about the years behind her. She thought about how often she had shrunk herself to fit into the spaces he left for her, how she had taken a job with flexible hours so she could be available whenever he needed her to be, how she had stopped mentioning her old dream of working in design because he used to roll his eyes whenever she brought it up, calling it a hobby dressed up as a career, how she had learned, slowly and without noticing, to make herself smaller so that his ego would always have room to be bigger. She did not decide anything that night. She simply lay there, awake, feeling the outline of a decision beginning to take shape somewhere deep inside her, the way a seed begins to shift before it breaks through soil. The next morning, she went to work as usual. Elena had spent the last 8 months as a freelance creative consultant for Reyes Consulting, a firm that had, over the past few years, become the industry's most talked-about name. She had been brought on almost by accident, filling in on a single project when their in-house designer left unexpectedly. That one project had turned into 3, then 5, then an entire campaign that had quietly become the most successful the company had launched in a decade. She had never mentioned much of this to Daniel, partly because he never asked. Partly because the moment she had once tried to explain her growing role there, he had cut her off to talk about his own work, about numbers and clients, and the deals he was chasing, and partly, if she was honest with herself, because Reyes Consulting was run by Marcus Reyes, a name Daniel could not hear without his jaw tightening. Marcus and Daniel had started in the same industry around the same time, years ago, fresh out of school with matching ambitions and very different approaches. Where Daniel chased shortcuts and flash, Marcus built slowly, carefully, treating every client relationship like something worth protecting rather than something to extract value from. Over the years, Marcus's firm had grown steadily, while Daniel's had stalled, restarted, and stalled again. Daniel referred to Marcus only ever in passing, always with a dismissive edge in his voice, as though naming him too often might give him more power than he deserved. Elena had never told Daniel that she worked with Marcus's company. She told herself it was because it was not important information, nothing worth the argument it might stir up. But some quiet part of her had known all along that keeping it separate was its own kind of protection, a space that belonged only to her. 3 days after the anniversary dinner, Elena received an email inviting her to the Hartwell Business Gala, an annual event known across the industry for celebrating the year's most influential names in business and design. She had heard of it before, had even seen photographs from past years in industry newsletters, but had never imagined attending. Daniel had mentioned the gala once, years earlier, with a bitter little laugh, calling it a room full of people who mistook expensive suits for actual talent. He had said it in the tone of someone who wished, more than anything, to be invited. Elena read the email twice before she understood. She was not simply being invited as a guest, she was being recognized. The email explained that she would be presented with the evening's Innovator of the Year award for her work on the campaign that had reshaped the firm's reputation over the past year. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words a third time, making sure she had not misunderstood. She thought, briefly, about telling Daniel, about the version of herself from years earlier who would have run to share this news immediately, eager for his approval, eager to see pride in his eyes. But she thought of the restaurant, of his voice cutting through the noise of the room, 5 years of me settling, and something in her decided, quietly and firmly, that this moment did not need his permission to matter. She told no one at home about the gala. She simply prepared for it the way she had once prepared for their anniversary, only this time, the care she put into herself was not in service of anyone else's approval. She chose a deep blue gown that made her feel like she was standing taller before she had even put it on. She did her own hair, humming quietly to herself, something she had not done in longer than she could remember. The evening of the gala, Daniel mentioned he had a work event to attend, something with a colleague from a firm he was hoping to partner with. He did not ask where Elena was going, dressed the way she was, and she did not offer an explanation. They left the apartment separately, each stepping into a night neither of them expected to collide. The Hartwell ballroom was filled with light and quiet music when Elena arrived. Round tables draped in white cloth stretched across the room, each one crowded with some of the most recognized names in the industry. She found her seat near the front, close to the stage, and tried to steady the nervous flutter in her chest as the evening unfolded around her. She did not notice Daniel until much later. He was seated 3 tables back, near the edge of the room, a guest of the colleague he had mentioned earlier. When their eyes briefly met across the crowded room, his expression flickered with confusion, as though his mind could not quite reconcile the woman across the ballroom with the wife he had left at home a few nights earlier, quietly finishing a plate of complimentary dessert. The program moved through several presentations, each one honoring different contributions to the year's business landscape. Then Marcus Reyes stepped onto the stage, tall and composed, his voice carrying easily across the room as he began to speak about the campaign that had, in his words, redefined what his company believed it was capable of. "This year's Innovator of the Year award," he said, "goes to someone who joined our team almost by accident and ended up transforming it entirely. Her instincts, her patience, and her refusal to settle for anything less than the best possible work have changed the way we do business." Elena's heartbeat quickened at the word settle, An echo of the very word that had wounded her 3 nights earlier, now returned to her wrapped in something entirely different. Marcus called her name, and for a moment, the room blurred slightly at the edges as she rose from her seat and made her way toward the stage, applause rising around her like a wave she had not expected to carry her. The crown, as it was traditionally called within the gala, was not an ordinary trophy. It was a delicate, gold-toned piece, shaped like a laurel, placed gently on the head of that year's honoree, a tradition unique to Hartwell that had, over the decades, become something of a symbol within the industry. Marcus placed it carefully atop Elena's head as the room continued to applaud, his expression warm and genuinely proud, without a trace of the performance she had grown so used to at home. From 3 tables back, Daniel watched in stunned silence. The room he had once dismissed, the man he had spent years quietly resenting, the woman he had humiliated only 3 nights earlier in front of strangers, all of it collided in a single moment he had never seen coming. He did not move from his seat. He did not call her name, he simply watched, his jaw tight, as applause filled the space where his careless words had once landed so easily. Elena did not search the crowd for him. She did not need his eyes to confirm what she already knew to be true. Standing there, beneath the warm lights of the stage, she felt something settle inside her that had nothing to do with disappointment and everything to do with arrival. She had spent 5 years shrinking herself into the shape of someone else's approval, and in this one unplanned, unexpected moment, she had found her way back to her own reflection, standing exactly where she belonged. After the applause faded and the evening moved on to its next presentation, Elena returned to her seat, the crown still resting lightly on her head. She did not look back toward the table where Daniel sat. She did not need to know what expression he wore, whether it was shame or shock or something else entirely. That was no longer her responsibility to carry. Later that night, walking out into the cool evening air, Elena paused for a moment beneath the string of lights hanging above the entrance. She thought about the version of herself who had planned a perfect anniversary dinner 3 days earlier, who had waited nervously for a man to notice her effort, who had smiled through humiliation because she did not yet know there was another way to stand in a room. She was not that version of herself anymore. She did not know exactly what would happen next, whether her marriage could survive what had cracked open between them, or whether this was simply the beginning of an ending that had been approaching for longer than she wanted to admit. But she knew, walking to her car with the city lights stretching out before her, that whatever came next, she would not shrink herself to make room for it. She had already found the version of herself worth standing beside, and this time, she intended to keep her.